All right, so everybody should see my screen here. It's a set of slides for interactive virtual reality using Adobe Animate. And let's just make sure here. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and get through the slides so we can get into more of the demo activity, because I think the VR stuff inside of Animate is pretty neat. There's VR inside of a lot of different Adobe applications now. Some of them are more video-centric. So, something like Premiere Pro. It's very, very, very video-centric. One of the neat things about virtual reality in Adobe Animate is that it is interactive. So that makes a big difference in terms of what you can do inside of the application and the stuff you're trying to build. So I've got a couple introductory slides here. There we go. So myself, I'm an instructor of technology at the University of Colorado Boulder. This is a new position for me in case people knew me as affiliated with the University of Denver in the past. I did a lot of stuff for them, including some adjunct teaching. I did some engineering work and some graphic design work for them. For the University of Colorado Boulder, I'm a faculty member in the Department of Advertising, PR, and Media Design, where I teach specifically on Adobe products and creative software to advertising students, media design students, and so forth. I'm also, of course, an Adobe Education Leader and Partner by Design. And a couple of resources if you want to break off from what we go over today. I do have a Designing VR Experiences with Adobe Animate course on LinkedIn Learning. So that's a good thing to explore after this if you're more interested in it, or even to, point your students to if they want to learn how to do some VR stuff inside of Animate. And this course doesn't go hugely in depth into all the stuff you can do inside of the VR document types inside of Animate, but it gives you a good foundation of that. If you're looking for books on Adobe Animate, I do have a new revision of my Learn Adobe Animate for Multiplatform Animations book coming out, and that's the focusing on the 2020 release of Animate. That should be out pretty soon, and the cover I have here is actually the older cover, so it's going to look a little different from this. So, Adobe Animate, let's get an overview here. What is Adobe Animate? So, most people know Animate from its former days when it was called Adobe Flash Professional, right? And Adobe Animate's gone way beyond that, of course. With Flash Professional, you could do the same sort of stuff that you can now inside of Animate. However, it was mostly constrained to, you're basically always going to output for Flash Player. It's totally different now with Adobe Animate. You can actually target multiple platforms. And one of the things that the team strives for is they're really looking to make this sort of a platform agnostic motion and interactivity application. So it can target HTML5 Canvas, it can target WebGL, and as we'll see today, it can target things like virtual reality platforms, and you've also got the ability to export things like HD video, and you can bring FLA files open inside of After Effects for further compositing, which is a workflow a lot of animators use. Lots and lots of different stuff you can do with Animate, and that's one of the most interesting things about it, I think, and why I'm always so interested in Animate and what's going on with it, is that it does encompass both the design and interactivity aspects of the creative workflow. So in terms of an overview of the UI, if you're just coming into Animate or if you haven't visited Animate in quite a while, this should be pretty useful because it'll tell you exactly what each portion of the UI, each portion of the workspace is actually meant to do, what its purpose is. So we're going to look at the stage first. The stage, and I've outlined this in blue here, the stage and pasteboard are actually sort of like the work surface that you're dealing with inside of Animate. So if you're creating content, if you're drawing out assets and vectors, if you're working with bitmap images on the stage in a visual way, you're going to be using the stage and the pasteboard to lay this stuff out. There's all the different tools you might expect in here, like the ability to zoom the stage, to center the stage, rotate it in case you're using like an Intuos or something like that. You can rotate the stage to your hand's liking. All sorts of different things there. You've also got the timeline, which is by default directly beneath the stage and pasteboard. So the timeline has your layers. So if you're used to working in something like Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator, you're used to working with layers. Layer management works the same exact way here. You can hide layers, you can lock layers, you can reorder layers, and any layers that appear at the top are going to, of course, their content will obscure the layers below. One of the things that sometimes trips people up inside of Animate when they're looking to actually create motion for Animate is that you should generally keep one piece of animated content per one layer. So like if you've got a ball moving across the screen, you would want that on its own layer. You don't want multiple items that are being animated in the same layer. For static objects, though, you can have as many static visual objects as you want in the same layer, and that's not going to matter that much. There's also a pretty good assortment of panels at this time. These are all accessed through the application menu. If you go to Window, you'll find all the different panels that you could possibly ever want inside of Animate. Probably some that you don't really want to. Some of the important ones include the Properties panel. So in the latest version of Animate, Animate 2020, the Properties panel is actually broken up into 4 distinct sets of properties. So like, say you have a frame or an object selected. In that case, you'd be able to switch in your Properties panel between using the object properties or using the document properties or the frame properties. And if you select a specific tool from the toolbar, you can even change the tool properties before you go ahead and use that tool. There's also the library panel, which allows you to store things like bitmap images and sounds that you import into Animate. And additionally, anything that's more complicated, like symbol types that you have inside of Animate, those will also appear in your library. There's a new assets panel that lets you do some like quick start type stuff. There's a number of assets that already come bundled with Animate. However, you can actually create things as your own assets to distribute or to use in other ways, including using them with the new tutorial builder that's built in. And there's a bunch of other panels to know, but those are probably the three most important ones. They're the ones that are kind of like there when you go in, right? So finally, we have the toolbar. And the tools inside of Animate, there are quite a few tools now. It's not Illustrator level yet, amount of tools where you've got 50 tools hidden away and you can only see like 25, right? But there are enough tools that the Animate team has now created a toolbar editor. You can choose to bring out or hide tools that you find most important or that you don't need. And you can even resize and customize different toolbars. It's pretty flexible. Whereas before, the toolbar was what it was, and there wasn't really a lot you could do with it. Right. And this last bit of kind of introductory stuff here is that we've got inside of Animate a frames-based timeline. So if you're used to working with Flash Pro, none of this has really changed from that time, right? But if you're coming into Animate from something like After Effects, it's going to be a little different because After Effects is primarily a time-based timeline, though it does have keyframes as well. With Animate, you're using a frames-based timeline that is then interpreted into time. So here I've got like this first image. It shows you that 10 seconds of animation, if you set your FPS or frames per second, that 10 frames of animation is going to equal 1 second of motion. Whereas the image in the middle, the one right below that, you can see the 1S marker is at the 30th frame. So I've got that set to 30 frames per second. So that's how time works inside of Animate. And if you're going through and actually animating stuff and creating motion, it's something to really be aware of because more frames of course, per second is going to be a much smoother animation experience. However, it's going to require a lot more frames for you to deal with, whereas a lower FPS setting, you're not going to have to manage as many frames, but it's going to be a little less smooth when it comes to actually animating. All right. So those are the basics. Now let's talk about the focus for this, which is VR, or virtual reality. So when it comes to Animate and virtual reality, there are specific document types that are set for VR, and we'll see those in a moment. But in either of those document types, what you basically do is you can either import images as textures, or you can even draw out things inside of Animate to be used as your textured background. There's a special VR view, which you can see in this image here, and that allows you to place your objects in 3D space. Because, of course, when you're looking at Animate on your computer, what you basically have is, a 2D stage, a 2D surface. The stage itself is not 3D capable. So if you took like a 360 spherical photograph and you place that on a stage inside of your Animate document, it's going to look all distorted, right? The VR view is going to allow you to actually see what that looks like as a virtual reality environment, and even place and manipulate different objects inside of that environment. It's a lot easier to work in than traditional stages. The VR documents are all WebGL, so that's GPU accelerated canvas elements inside of HTML. And you can import 3D models into this also, so in the form of GLB files. And lastly, all the VR stuff is in beta right now. So, things could change, but, they keep working on making the VR document types better as we move along. So the two types of documents you can use, there are Panoramic VR, which is basically like, I tend to think of it like a slide carriage, right? From the old slide projectors. I remember when I applied to graduate school, I needed to, have a bunch of slides created, buy an actual, slide cassette, round cassette, and put all the little slides in there. That's how I think about it. It's really just a cylinder, though. So you've got your panoramic cylinder, and anything you use as a texture is sort of painted on the inside of that cylinder, and then you as the viewer are in the center of the cylinder just looking around at the different walls and just seeing that projection. With 360-degree VR, the content, instead of being wrapped on a cylinder, is wrapped on a sphere. So if you can look up, you can look down, side to side, it's fine. And both of these can use images that you bring in, either panoramic or equirectangular, or just simply drawn content inside of Animate, or from Photoshop or Illustrator, or whatever you might want. In terms of VR and animation, you can absolutely add animation to virtual reality content. And, you just use keyframes and tweens just like any other Animate project. So if you're used to working in this environment, you just create new layers with that stuff, different animations on there, and stuff can move around you within the cylinder or the sphere or wherever you're targeting. A couple things to note, though: textured layers, so things that you mark as textures, cannot be animated. So you can't have animation as part of your textured background. So you can add static content to things too. It doesn't have to be animation, but you've got a lot of choices when it comes to motion inside of VR. Also, interactivity. So Animate lets you manage your virtual reality animations at runtime with the help of APIs. So there's a full API if you're interested in more of the coding aspect of things. They've published their API online. And you can do all sorts of stuff in the API, like switch scenes, so like moving from one location to another. You can change the camera perspective, so have it really low and looking up, or having it above and looking down. You can load in 3D models, again, GLB files. You can target child instances that are part of your project, add triggers, reactions. Pretty much anything you would expect to do inside of Animate when it comes to interactivity, you can do inside of VR as well. And what you can see here is actually the actions wizard. And there's kind of two ways to work with code inside of Animate. One is to just write it yourself if you know what you're doing and you have the documentation. The other is to use the Actions wizard, which kind of steps you through bit by bit on how to do certain things. Like you can see here, switching scenes. So if you wanted to go like from an outside environment to an inside environment, or from one room to another inside of a museum experience, these are all different things you could do using this platform. All right, so let's have a look at Animate itself here. There we go. So you should be seeing Adobe Animate right here. And what we're going to do is go ahead and create a new VR document. We're going to start with a 360 spherical VR environment. And for that, you can either click Create New on the side here, or just go to More Presets. Either way, it's going to open up the new document window. Here's my new document window. And you've got a bunch of different stuff on the top here. This is very similar to what you would see inside of Photoshop or Illustrator. We have different categories and different presets within those categories. So for instance, Animate's used heavily for the creation of digital advertising. So you've got all your standard web and mobile digital ad formats right here as presets. Pretty convenient. But if we go to Advanced, that's where we're going to find any of the beta platforms. And both VR Panorama and VR 360 are considered beta right now. So you're going to find them under beta platforms. And the nice thing about both of these is they are both, HTML native. So they don't require any plugins or anything like that. It's very similar to the approach that Adobe's taken with HTML5 Canvas, which you'll find right above here. But it doesn't use Create.js libraries. It uses additional WebGL type engines that Adobe is developing at this time. So let's go ahead and create a VR 360 document. I'm going to select that. We can see it's a sphere. And from here, we can change the width, height, and frame rate. But it actually makes sense to go in and do that a little later on. So I always just, when I create one of these, I just hit Create. And it brings up the new document for us. So as we mentioned, here's our stage with the pasteboard around it. Here's our layers down here. And what I need to do is actually go through. So I've got something that I pulled down from Adobe Stock right here. And I'm going to just drag that directly into my stage. So super easy to get bitmap images inside of Animate. And you can see it's way, way bigger than my stage, right? It's way bigger. So, you could think about, well, how do I do this? How do I make the stage the same size? If we click on the object itself in the Properties panel, we can see it's a bitmap instance. And we can see right here the width is 8,000 pixels, the height is 4,000 pixels. There's a 2-to-1 ratio, which is pretty standard with 360 photography. But it's really easy to actually adjust the stage size. If we pop over to our document settings here, you'll notice there's a big button right by width and height. It's called Match Contents. If I click that, it's going to basically make the dimensions of my document the same size as the contents of my document. So really good to know, super easy to do that. Then I can fit in window, and there we go. There's our spherical photograph right there. So right now, this is not a texture yet. It's not a textured layer. It's just a flat photo. So if I go in here and choose Window, VR View, that's going to bring up my virtual reality viewer. And if I launch that, it's going to go ahead and give us a little preview of what this is going to look like. And as you can see right here, right now it's just this weird flat surface. Right? So it's not VR quite yet. So what we're going to do is look down here inside of the layers in your timeline. Let's go ahead and rename this layer to something like background or texture or something of that nature. And we're going to lock it down so I don't add anything to it. But notice we got this little thing right here, create texture wrapping. So if I click that, now my background is considered a texture layer, and it's going to be used as a wrapper for my VR environment, whether it's a sphere or a cylinder. And if I go ahead and refresh to regenerate the VR view, I should be able to just look around the room like this. And you can see that looks a lot better than it did before. Let's make this even bigger so that we can see it. Now, that's just like the first step to doing stuff like this, right? Because as mentioned, you can add animation and static images and things like that to this. So inside of here, I've got some stuff in an additional FLA file. And that's already open right here. What I can do is actually create a new layer. And inside of my library, here's my Adobe stock image. But I can switch from my current document, which is currently named Untitled-2, which is super intuitive. I would have to save this and give it a name if I wanted to name it properly. But I've also got any other FLA document or Animate document that is open here. So here's my additional.fla. And I've got a couple things in here. So I've got some different paintings and things like that. Let's go ahead and drag one of these paintings out here. Let's just stick it on this wall right here. And maybe grab another one and put it, I don't know, it's part of this here. Of course, you can use your free transform tool and anything else that you might really be used to using inside of Animate. Both resize, reposition, rotate any of this stuff. I'm going to center that right there. Let's go ahead and mark this as a texture as well. Lock it down. And let's refresh our VR view. And depending upon, of course, how big your stuff is. Oh, it already did it. Oh, well. I clicked it again, so we're going to have to be patient for Animate here. All right. So now, as I move around, we've got this extra layer. I've got some artwork up there, and it's not anything that I can really interact with quite yet, but that's actually pretty easy to do as well. So if I click on any of these paintings here, of course, these are graphic symbols right now. To make something interactive, it would need to be a movie clip symbol. So what I can do is just change the behavior of that to a movie clip symbol. One of the things people don't realize in Animate is you're not really committed to the behavior of a symbol type. I mean, you should do it correctly, but you're not completely committed to it because you can always override the instance behavior. So this is really a graphic symbol, but I'm changing it into a movie clip symbol behavior so I can give it this instance name and make it interactive, right? So I'm going to just name this painting, give it that instance name right there. And now that I've provided an instance name to this, I'm actually going to be able to go to Window and go to my Actions panel, which is F9. And immediately when you get into your Actions panel, you're going to be presented with this, and most people aren't going to know what the heck to write in here, right? So you can add using Wizard. And once I click that, this looks a little nicer. It's a nice little UI. And I've got all these different actions I can choose from. So pretty much what we want to do is be like, well, what do we actually want to do to this? What do we want to have happen, right? So we could go to a previous scene, go to a specific scene, a next scene, whatever. We could move the camera. We could play stuff. I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to, let's see, I'm going to look for play. So I want to play. And what do I want to play? I want to play the timeline of our painting. And notice painting comes up here, and that's the exact instance name that I gave it inside of our properties panel. And then that writes the code for us. So this .painting.play. This is going to play the internal timeline of the painting. Let's go next. And then we have to determine what the triggering event is. So what do we actually want to use as our triggering event? We've got collisions, we've got clicks, all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to just say on click. And what do we want to click? I want to click the painting itself. So there's painting again. And this is going to write out the code for us. If I finish an add, you can see what the code looks like. And Adobe Animate has placed in a bunch of comments for us to describe what each step is doing. So what basically is happening, we're adding an event listener of type click. And when the painting feels a click, it's going to go ahead and play its internal timeline. So in terms of its internal timeline, if we double click on that painting, we can see there's actually nothing in there right now. And also, we need to set a little stop action in here. So I'm going to just quickly do that. Say this.stop. And that's pretty universal. And what I want to do is actually just put a little bit of extra frames in here. And this is just using just the normal way of inserting frames inside of Animate. And maybe what I'll do is just have a little bit of motion in here. Let's go ahead and zoom in a bit. Lock some of this junk down. What I'm going to do is just, I don't know, put a little ball in here or something. Let's make the little guy have a little red tear very quickly. And we'll add in a new keyframe here. Oops, that's the wrong layer. And create a shape tween. And here we're just going to shift the position of that. So now we've got a little bit of animation in here. And if I go back to scene 1, let's go ahead and open up VR View again. Now, interactivity isn't going to work inside of VR View simply because it doesn't. We'd actually have to go ahead and hit the play button right here to test movie. But we can see here that we can move stuff around to reposition it inside of VR View, and the stage is going to respond to that, as you can see back there. Let's go ahead and hit export so we can see the results of this. All right, so there's our painting, and if I click, there we go. There's our little bit of interactivity there, and of course you can have stuff do more advanced things like be able to go to different scenes and so forth, different environments. All sorts of really cool stuff that you can do with Animate and VR. So let's move back into our slides. We've got like 2 minutes left here. So I will wrap this up. So thank you very much for coming, of course. And if you want to contact me after this, here is all of my different social presences and my email and my website and junk like that. So feel free to get in touch with me. Twitter and email are probably the 2 best ways to get in touch. And if you have any questions, let's go ahead. And with the 2 minutes we have left, we will do that. I'm going to stop sharing.